There are thousands of amateur racing clips on YouTube just ripped straight from the GoPro. Let's put a little more effort into this one. My name is Austin Oganowski, and whether the algorithm recommended this to you randomly, or you followed my channel for a while now, I'm a racing sim enthusiast, racing simulator developer, as well as a sport compact racer based out of Western Canada. And today I'm going to take you on a commentated ride-along here in Valemount, British Columbia at Rocky Mountain Speedway. The date is June 15th, 2024. The Edmonton Oilers are currently in the middle of a really exciting Stanley Cup run, and a bunch of us have been invited out 5 hours west of Edmonton to this little 3/8 mile dirt track for the track's grand reopening. This is their North Wilkesboro moment. The track last held a race before the NHL lockout, so cars have not turned competition laps here in 20 years, and the Cinnamons did a really good job of getting this track together. Something you won't be able to tell from this footage, the front stretch is downhill, the back stretch is uphill, so the braking points for each corner are a little different. Our 25 lap main is the absolute last race on the bill today. We got super stocks and hobby stocks before us, which you can see rolling off from their podium celebrations in front of me. So when we get out there, the track is going to have noticeably taken on a ton of rubber, and it's basically going to be an asphalt race. This makes tire selection really important. At this level, you're basically allowed any tire brand you want, any tire compound you want. In the back of my truck, I have a set of 13-inch Hoosier Stars mediums, which are like a dedicated dirt mini stock tire, as well as what's on the car right now, which are a set of 14-inch BF Goodrich radial TAs. The Hoosiers are fantastic in wet conditions. They disperse loose material really well. And they also have a ridiculous amount of lateral grip. I mean, you can just keep turning the wheel and the car keeps turning. But there's a catch. The Hoosiers are a significantly lighter tire. Like, you can feel the difference just holding them. You can pretty much pick these things up and throw them at people. And my ride clocks in at 2,600 pounds. A bit heavy. So in longer races, or races where the surface dries out, they cannot take that much load on them that consistently. Really easy to overheat them. The BF Goodrich radial TAs, by comparison, are a dedicated street tire, and again, they're usually used by guys cruising around in their muscle cars during the summer months. But by virtue of them being a thicker tire, a stiffer tire, which also changes the balance of the car because tire spring rate is a thing, and designed primarily for asphalt use, when the track dries out and we're running longer main events, they build heat slower, and they also give you crazy forward bite off the corner. Dirt tracks only evolve in one way. They're always going to get drier over the course of an evening, so later in the day, it's advantageous in sport compact racing to run a non-race tire on your race car. However, it's also on you as a driver to kind of take advantage of the different traits of a street tire. Because you don't have this insane lateral grip, you cannot just crank the wheel and expect instant front grip. You have to diamond the corner quite aggressively, and then try and accelerate with the wheel as straight as you can off the corner, basically so the diff locks as early as possible, and you get the full amount of that crazy forward bite that these tires offer. So that's why during this race, the line I run is going to look a lot different than the people around me. My driving line is basically a solution for the weird characteristics that running a non-race tire in a race scenario produces. Anyways, pace car's off. That is Terry Bedford beside us. And there are 3 or 4 sim racing nerds in this race, so the pace among the top 4 or 5 cars is going to be spicy. Now, when you run a tuned ECU, you sacrifice torque at low revs for torque at high revs, so you're always going to get roasted on the start like this. This right here is not my fault, I'm foot to the floor. Now, people tend to forget that turn 1, lap 1, you will always enter a little slower than you will at any other point in the race, so I intentionally drive in as hard as I can, about a car length and a half deeper. And the results are obvious. I've gained all of it back, and now the motor's wound up. Going into 3 and 4, I don't know where Terry is, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to enter in the middle here, and gradually through 3 and 4, work the car downwards while still giving him about 3/4 of the lane to work with, so if we do make contact, it doesn't kill us. 1 lap off the board, and there's a problem brewing, and it's a big problem. Really big problem. Even though the track is slicked off really nice, and I personally love these conditions, it basically feels like sim racing on worn tires. It's a lot of fun. Going into turn 1, directly in my braking zone, there's a 20-foot patch where the track is coming apart. You'll see it right here. My biggest strength in these cars compared to everyone else I've ever raced against in this class is threshold braking, and now you've taken that away from me because right where I brake is a patch of loose dirt where the car can basically just do anything on me. So that's a problem. Problem number 2, which we're finding out 3 or 4 laps into this, is that we are catching lap traffic way quicker than expected, and the closing rates are a little unsafe. This is just something that happens at this level. Sport compact races are not seeded by ELO rank. You will have iRacing nerds and people who have spent too much money on their car. That's me. Sharing the grid with guys who are just out there for fun. What I will say though, And what we're seeing right here is that these guys are really, really well behaved. So I'm taking stock of that. So what am I doing at this point in the race? What are my goals? Like, what am I trying to accomplish here? My goal is to push as hard as I can to build up a gap from second place, so when we inevitably hit lap traffic, and I naturally start bleeding time having to navigate through them, I can afford to get held up once or twice and be safe about passing someone. I'm also trying to use as little wheel input as possible to keep the tire temps of the right front down. Remember, the right front tire in a front-wheel drive car does a ton of work. You're asking it to turn, you're asking it to brake, and you're asking it to accelerate, and on most occasions, it's actually doing both of those things at the same time. That's just the nature of the front-wheel drive platform, right? So this will always devolve into a game of extreme tire management. And you can make your life easier as a driver in the back half of the race by running the front half of the race with a lot of brake, which is what you're seeing here. This pays dividends during the final 10 laps. And spoiler alert, we're going to need it, because that bump right there, that's Chris Cinnamon on us. We are not running away with this race. Chris is another sim racing enthusiast in the number 220 car. He's driven 8 hours from Fort McMurray to be here, and his Pontiac Pursuit has the same 2.2 liter Ecotec power plant as our ride, so I have no option but to pinch him down into the lap car here. Our experience levels are so similar and our cars are so evenly matched that if he gets around me once, and he gets lucky on one lap car encounter, he wins the race. So the storyline playing out here isn't Austin Ogonowski sleepwalks his way to a win at some random dirt track, but rather two sim racing nerds who are in cars they're probably overqualified to be driving, are about to start brawling over a novelty check worth $371.88. They've both driven upwards of 5 hours to be here, so neither of them particularly wants to lose, and they're starting to catch lap traffic. It's great. I'd pay $10 to sit in a lawn chair and watch this. And it seems like a lot of people did. So same deal, pinching Chris down behind the lap car, trying to keep our motor spooled up as best as possible. Because again, with Chris in what's essentially the same car that we're driving, I know that if I get a good run off the corner, the best he can hope for is to be equal to my speed. And as we approach more lap traffic, the game plan is always going to be running an inch off their door, so Chris gets trapped behind that lapped car. It just is what it is. And now, because we've lapped these guys a couple of times, I'm at least confident that, hey, yeah, some of these guys are slow, but they're consistent and they're holding lines, so I can feel safe about doing this. We're not going to, climb tires or anything insane like that. What's not safe is, we appear to have a visibility problem, a really bad one. This is just a reality of racing at amateur dirt tracks. Not every facility is going to have professional tilling equipment, and it's just something you have to keep in mind, especially as we're catching a cluster of 4 cars here, nearing the midway point of the race. If too many cars are too close together, you might not be able to see very well. So I have a choice here. Do I go higher on the lap cars or do I go low? This is going to look terrifying here, especially with no walls, but there's a purpose behind it. In any type of oval racing, the right front suspension geometry is integral to your car's handling. Even the smallest of contact, especially in a street car like this, can screw up your alignment and basically make the car undrivable for the rest of the race. So I'm always trying to protect the right front and set up passes on the outside. You'll see this with my buddy Nick here. I fully intend to pass him on the outside, but he's had a bit of a steering problem this week, so when he pushes up, I just take the bottom lane. As I clear him, you'll notice my transition back to the preferred line is not very abrupt, if at all. And that's just a courtesy thing. We don't run mirrors, so you really can't tell where some people are. I do know, however, where Chris Cinnamon is. That's where that shove is from. I want to go low, Chris is there. I want to go high, there's really not room going into the corner. In fact, just like turn 1, there's a bunch of loose shit up there. So I opt to cooperate with Chris and slot him behind him so we can both take care of this lap car. And we get our first look at Chris Cinnamon's Pontiac Pursuit in front of us. This is a problem. This is what I talked about earlier in the race. Our cars are so evenly matched that him merely getting around me once and getting lucky with one lapped car could probably seal the race for him. Chris is also on Hoosier G60s, I believe, which are overall a more capable tire than my street BF Goodrich radial TAs. And in just 2 turns, I've been able to recognize that, alright, even though we're in more or less the same car, he's able to pull on me about half a car length off each individual corner. I might not win this race. So I'm going to have to get really greedy when he hits lap traffic. Chris is going to be smart and go around up top. That's a good call. I'm instead going to drive into the corner aiming at the lap car, and hope I'm not at his bumper until corner exit. So that works and the delta remains even. We're still in it, there's more lap cars ahead of us, they're closer together, we're going to have another opportunity to be greedy and claw back some of our delta. Chris is just as experienced as we are, he's going to go higher on these lap cars to protect his right front tire, and that's going to force our hand into taking the qualifying line to claw back the delta. We got lucky. There's nobody on the bottom impeding our progress, and Chris got caught up in the loose shit we identified a couple laps ago. 2 seconds to decide whether to shoot the gap. The Navy car does not have offset rims, they've held their line the whole race, let's do it. Pinch down so you don't push up into the Civic with offset rims and fuck up your geometry or climb tires, and this is Austin from the future. Congrats, that was the winning move of the race. Fun side note, there's amazing pro shot footage of this race online, and you can see kids in the frame reacting to this because they knew that that won the race too. Still gotta play some defense though. What does playing defense pertain to in the final 2 or 3 laps here? For the situation at hand, Chris is, for all intents and purposes, driving an identically prepared car compared to what we are. So even though he's knocking on the back door, there's never going to be a situation where he just randomly gains 2 car lengths. And because we're both in front-wheel drive cars, there's never going to be a situation where he can lift up my rear tires and wreck me. They're not the driven wheels anyway, so I don't really care. What I'm instead focusing on as we take the white is to just have these massive, wide, arcing lines to keep momentum built in the motor. And you'll notice I even give him a whole lane to work with here because building revs and having the diff lock early because you're accelerating straight off is more important than blocking. The only time I ever truly play D is final corner, final lap, you park the car on the bottom on entry just to seal off an incoming attack, and then immediately aim at the exit wall. You'll notice this is the highest I've run on the front stretch the entire race, again, to build revs in the motor coming to the line. And that's the end result. We've just gone 25 laps, caution-free, at a track with no walls that hasn't been raced on in 20 years. We made the right call in tire selection, we saved our tires efficiently, we couldn't have run the low line to get around those lap cars if we hadn't saved earlier in the race, and all of our geometry is still intact. We never made contact with anyone. So that brings us to the end of what I hope will be the first of many Sport Compact ride-along episodes. Figured I'd do something a little bit different than just, rip the GoPro footage and upload it without context like every other amateur racer does. This gives you some insight as to what it's like to actually drive an amateur-level car. Because I do know in at least some sim racing communities, some guys look down on racing like this, either feeling it's beneath them or it's hick racing, or something to that effect. But the reality is that there is still quite a lot going on, especially if you have other talented guys in the field with you. And these races can get way more intense and way more intricate than you really ever anticipated them to be.